experience working at the local level in downtown communities. So just excited to be here and looking forward to this presentation.
Yeah, so just like you guys heard, we are going to record this presentation, so it'll be available online to watch and rewatch as many times as you would like. We are going to wait till the end of the presentation to answer questions. Please feel free to pop them in the chat. Mickey's going to monitor that during the life of the presentation. We will do some direct answering of questions during the criteria section, just because we know that's a really important part of the application. So yeah, we'll go through the guidelines, the application, the environmental process, and hopefully answer any questions everybody may have. I'm going to turn off my video just so not to be a distraction during presenting, and we'll go to the next slide.
All right, I will be turning off my video as well, and then get us to the next slide. All right, so just a quick overview of the Historic Preservation Grant Program. It is a state-funded program created in 2019, so relatively new, as a result of Senate Bill 338, Sections 1 through 17. This is an ongoing program with a grant cycle every 2 years, and awards are made as part of the legislative session. So this current cycle that we are in, or starting, will be the third cycle. The program was funded through an increase in the bed tax. The program is designed to support public or private entities with the preservation of historic sites, historical societies, or history museums through grant funding and demonstrating the economic impact of historical resources throughout the state. The program provides the opportunity to stimulate economic development, community revitalization, and statewide tourism through increased investment, job creation or retention, business expansion, and local tax base growth. The program is designed to support a variety of activities and historic resources. Historic preservation grants can be used to leverage additional funding resources and tax credits. Funding can better position historic sites and museums for success, address critical needs, and provide the financial catalyst to unlock the economic and heritage potential of Montana's historic resources. So this gives an overview of the first cycle. So this was the 2021 legislative session. It's also referred to as the 2023 biennium. So it gets a little confusing there, but these were projects that were awarded in 2021. And as you can see, we have a breakdown here of historic sites versus history museums, but you should note that many of the history museums that applied or were awarded are also historic sites. So many of the history museums fit into both categories. And then you can also see here a breakdown of the applicant types. So we have government applicants, nonprofit, and then for-profit. And government would include city, county, state, agencies, all of those. So in 2021, we had 26 projects awarded with a total of 5.4 million awarded. Then this was the last cycle. So this was in 2023, the last legislative session. And we had 84% historic sites, 16% history museums. But again, many of these history museums were also counted as historic sites. You can see the breakdown again, but then the most important thing is that we had 44 projects awarded and 11.4 million total awarded. So you can see a pretty significant increase here in funding and an increase in the number of projects that were awarded. All right, so eligible applicants. We receive a lot of questions about this, so we'll be going over this in detail. So first, it can be an individual applying through a fiscal agent or an individual applying in coordination with a local government. Note here that private residences, their eligibility is complicated. So we encourage you to inquire with Commerce staff regarding eligibility. We'll be getting into this later, but historic preservation grant projects must ensure that a significant portion of the facility be open to public access and use. So projects that confer only a private benefit are not eligible, and that includes many private single-family residences. Also eligible an association, so this is a for-profit, nonprofit, or not-for-profit organization or business, and then a governing unit, so city or town, county, consolidated government, representative of a governing unit, state and federal agencies, or tribal government. Please note that a waiver of sovereign immunity will be required for a tribal government if MHPG funds are awarded. All right, eligible project types. So eligible projects or eligible applicants can apply to complete projects or activities for the preservation of historic sites, historical societies, or history museums. And this can include internal or external improvements that address infrastructure, building renovation, maintenance, or building code issues, improvements that enhance security, climate control, or fire protection. And in addition, projects with a total cost of over $50,000 may use up to 10% of grant funding for planning and/or grant administration costs that are directly related to preservation activities A and B. So, for example, if an applicant is awarded $100,000, they could spend up to $10,000 of that award on, for instance, staff time to meet grant requirements, or they could hire a grant administrator or accountant to handle components of the grant if staff capacity is limited. In addition, if a historic site is applying for, say, $300,000 in interior and exterior renovations, they could spend $30,000 of that award towards a PAR. All right, so on this slide, if you noticed, historic sites, what constitutes a historic site? Historic sites are considered eligible if one of these criteria is met. So again, just one of these needs to be met. Either the structure or site is listed on national, state, or a local historic registry, and suitable documentation of that would include registry paperwork. Structure or site contributes to historic district. Same thing, suitable documentation of this could include registry paperwork for that, for the site that pertains to its historical significance. Or the structure is more than 50 years old and has a documented significance to the history of a Montana community or region. So suitable documentation for this could include a letter of support from the local preservation commission or preservation officer. And here we have a couple of examples of projects that have been awarded in the past. All right, so in order to be eligible, projects should demonstrate a reasonable and achievable budget and implementation schedule. There is preference granted to applicants who anticipate completion of a project within 2 years of a signed contract. And the project can include multiple activities, but it should include a prioritization of project activities or components. The project should demonstrate economic impact immediately after completion. And then the most important one, based on the interests of the legislature, I would say, is that projects must confer public benefit. So proposed project must be comprised of standalone activities. So applicants should be aware of the conditions of a building and prioritize activities accordingly. Projects that include multiple activities within the scope of work, in that case, the applicants must demonstrate the necessity of each activity. And then finally, in terms of public benefit, this means either it's contributing In the case of a history museum, it's contributing to the preservation of its collection or the display of its collection. If it's a privately owned entity, it must be open to the public in some capacity. Essentially, you need to demonstrate in the application that there is a public benefit to this building and public access. All right, so there are design considerations that will go into the application. Projects should adhere to the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties and the related guidelines for preserving, rehabilitating, restoring, and reconstructing historic buildings, historic sites, structures, objects, and community districts. These standards are really comprehensive. I encourage you to take a look. They address both exterior and interior historic building work and suggest consistent approaches to treatments and techniques that help maintain the integrity of historic resources. So choosing the most appropriate treatment for a building requires careful decision-making about the historical significance of a building and taking into consideration other factors such as the level of significance, physical condition, proposed use, and code and other regulations. So I really encourage you to review the standards at the link above and how they relate to your specific project. I also suggest that if you are a listed building, so if you're listed on a registry, you can always reach out to SHPO as a resource. And then finally, we've provided on our website a glossary of terms relevant to historic preservation and to this grant program. So I encourage you to check that out as well. All right, eligible funding and match requirement. So eligible applicants may apply for funding up to $500,000 per eligible project. So only one application per project is allowed, although again, you can have multiple activities within that application. Previous MHPG applicants are encouraged to apply again, and previous or current grantees can apply again. So even if you have a current grant, you are still eligible to apply this cycle. As we noted in the beginning, total available funding is derived from the tax collections allocated and deposited into the Historic Preservation Grant Account and further carried out according to the guidance established in Senate Bill 338. We do require a 20% match of the total project cost for all applications. You do not necessarily need to have secured the match at the time of application, but if you are awarded, you will be required to demonstrate that you can supply that match. All right, so what counts as a match? Or let's see, did we skip one? Oh yeah, here we go. So eligible match, what counts as a match? So cash, grants, and or loans, all of that can count towards your 20%. We also do accept in-kind contributions, although only 1/3 of the total match can be in-kind. In-kind contributions are considered at a rate of $20 an hour. They must be documented, so we do provide a sample volunteer log, and they can include materials. So if materials are donated, for instance, you just include a receipt showing the total amount that those materials are worth. Previous expenditures can be eligible, but they are only eligible as matching funds when directly related to the preparation of architectural or engineering studies, reports, and construction of the proposed project, and completed after February 28th, 2023. So that is, in order to count for a match, funds cannot have been spent more than a year before the application deadline. We chose the date as we needed to draw a line, and this is a reasonable timeline, right? We didn't want, or it wouldn't have been feasible for funds expended much earlier to be eligible, but this allows you to count any funds within that year timeframe towards the match. For the in-kind aspect, you can estimate this for the application, but documentation is required once awarded. So again, supplies count, volunteer hours count. So if someone, say, donates $200 worth of supplies, we just need a receipt that includes the cost and noting the donation. All right, ineligible match. So previous expenditures when they're not directly related to the proposed project, previous expenditures completed more than 1 year prior to the application deadline. So this would include any costs incurred before February 29th, or I guess February 28th, 2023. And then ongoing or monthly operational costs, and then staff salary. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mackenzie, who's going to take us through the environmental review.
Thanks, Jordan. Environmental, the favorite part of grants. So the MHPG program and all of the projects are required to follow an environmental process, and they are subject to MHPA, or the Montana Environmental Policy Act. We know that this process can be cumbersome and seem difficult, but mostly it's about making sure the public has a say in the project and that any potential impacts of your proposed project is taken into consideration. So all applicants must determine a finding level, discuss the project and finding level at a public meeting, and make a final environmental determination. We're going to go through this step by step in the following slides. So step 1 of the environmental process. Oh, thanks, Jordan. All applicants must designate an environmental certifying officer. So this person is going to be responsible for ensuring the environmental review is completed, and they are responsible for signing the final environmental determination. For local governments, this would be the chief executive officer. So we're talking about the mayor, the county commissioner. For businesses or nonprofits, this could be the owner, CEO, executive director, board chair. An authorized representative may complete the environmental review process. So you can have someone else do the complete environmental review process, fill out all the forms, but that responsible entity, that environmental certifying officer, has to sign off on them. For step 2, you need to determine and review the proposed scope of work. And what that means is you're clearly defining what the proposed scope of work is for your project and all the activities involved. So such as like exterior pointing, climate or security systems, installations, roof replacements. You want to consider the larger effects of the entire project, not just the portion for which the MHPG funds would be directed. So for example, if you're applying for a museum climate control systems and you're building a museum expansion, you're going to be considering the environmental impacts of all the new construction, not just that climate control system. You also want to make sure to identify any agencies or groups which may have a vested interest in the project or from whom you need any additional licenses or permits from. So moving into step 3, all applicants determine if the project is considered exempt from MHPA. MHPA has 3 different levels of environmental review based on the significance of the potential impacts. So those levels are 1, exempt or excluded from MHPA review, 2, environmental assessment required, and 3, an environmental impact statement. Due to the nature of these projects, most of them will fall under exempt or excluded. Some may fall under environmental assessment. I have never seen a project in any of my grant programs require an environmental impact statement, so that would be highly unlikely in this program. If for some reason that's something that you anticipate once you look it over, please contact us right away. We can discuss that in further detail. I'm going to go into what exempt and excluded, which most of the projects will be on the next slide. Okay, so exempt and excluded from MHPA. Oh, I think yep, there we go. So if projects are listed as statutorily or categorically exempt from MHPA, are not required to complete an environmental assessment, which is our environmental checklist appendix B2, which you can find on our website. If a typically exempt activity may cause significant public controversy related to its effect on the human environment or cultural environmental resources, we do suggest an EA is advised. So activities that are exempt under MHPA would be any sort of administrative actions, so clerical work, grant admin, consulting. We're talking about any engineering or architectural work that's being completed. Minor repairs, operations, and maintenance of existing equipment or facilities. And then this last one is where most of our projects fall. Projects that involve only minor repairs or rehab to an existing facility, including functional replacement of an existing facility or facility components. So example, we had a museum that came in and they're replacing their roof. That's going to fall under this because you're replacing an existing functional component of the building. Where you're going to get into a higher level of review is normally under new construction. If you're not sure, please reach out to me and I'm happy to walk through your scope of work, where it could potentially fall within MHPA. Love to do that. So if a project is not exempt and doesn't meet these 3 bullets, then you would have to move forward and do the environmental assessment or full environmental checklist Appendix B2. So we'll go to the next slide. All projects must do a public process and hold a public meeting regardless of the expected level of review. It's an important part of this process. It can be a standalone event or included on the agenda of another meeting, such as a council or board meeting. It can be just a public presentation. It's just important that the public is made aware of the meeting and has a reasonable opportunity to attend. So I just want to give some examples quickly of how folks have met this public meeting requirement before. We've had nonprofits just, send an advertisement out or send something out through Facebook to the community saying, hey, at our normal monthly board meeting, we're going to talk about our project that we're going in for MHPG and talk about the environmental. And so that meets the requirements. Cities, counties add it as an agenda item to their normal meetings. We've had businesses or nonprofits asked to be added on the agenda at a city council meeting. That's also acceptable. You just want to make sure that you're letting the public know and presenting this information to them. So when advertising for a public meeting, applicants should follow their standard processes for engaging the public. You want to make efforts to ensure the public is made aware. You can post on Facebook, like I had said. You can post on your own website. You could place ads in the local paper. It's all great ways. We have a sample ad available in our appendix for environmental. The advertisements should include a description of the project and reason for the meeting, the name of the applicant, time and location. You'd want to post it a couple days in advance. We don't want to see it posted kind of the night before. That's not really giving the public a reasonable amount of time to attend. You should hope to hold it at a time and place that facilitates public participation. And if possible, if you could hold the meeting at the project site, that's always great. Let the public see what this potential application could do for the facility or historic site. We really encourage that. You'll want to provide an overview of the project. Were there alternatives for the project or are there? And then what your environmental finding is, your preliminary environmental finding. So you're going to present and say, this project is exempt or excluded from full MHPA review because we're trying to fix the foundation on this historic building, for example. You'd want to respond to any comments, which can be easily addressed within the meeting, and then make sure there's time in the agenda for responses. So if you have time for that Q&A, basically. Once that public meeting is completed, you can make a final environmental determination. If for some reason after public comment, there's additional time needed to respond to comments, or it comes out that, okay, maybe we're not exempt, maybe we do need to complete that EA or full environmental assessment, you'll want to schedule a second public meeting. Make sure you're taking meeting minutes if possible, or at least, writing down the comments and how they were addressed. Let's see. And then if a project was initially thought to be exempt, kind of like I'd mentioned, but does not meet that determination, you're going to have to make, that's usually happens when the preliminary determination is not in line with the full scope of the project. So kind of back to that example of the say expanding museum, because it's an easy one. If you're going before the public and saying we're exempt because we are putting in HVAC, which is internal, but you're building a new construction facility, and someone says, hey, but what about the impacts of this entirely new facility on the surrounding area? That's not exempt. That would necessitate moving to a different level of review and addressing that. So step 5, yep. So this is that part we were talking about, making that final environmental determination after the public meeting. You're gonna want to sign off on this. We have a form where you can sign off. The ECO signs off and says, yes, we are exempt. We have our public meeting and everyone concurs, or the same for an environmental assessment. And again, if for some reason an environmental impact statement comes up, please just contact us immediately and we can chat about that. It's just very highly unlikely. So step 6, this is for all applicants. We have an environmental review form, or Appendix B1. Everyone has to complete this. It provides a summary of the proposed project, the environmental determination level, and details the public process that was followed to arrive at the final determination. This form has to be signed off by the ECO. Again, an authorized representative may assist in completing the form and review, but the ECO has to sign it. It's a 1-page form. It has 6 questions on it. It does require a small bit of narrative for each, but some of the narrative is 1 sentence. I would say the most narrative you would need to put in that form is maybe a small paragraph in the public meeting portion. And then step 7, which we kind of talked about, is that ECO has to just sign a resolution certifying that environmental determination. And we have sample resolutions for governmental and non-governmental applicants available on our website, both if you're an exempt excluded project or if your project required an environmental assessment. And so step 8, submitting everything to us. So this needs to come along with the application. You're going to be submitting all the environmental documents. So this is a handy list of, if you're an exempt excluded project, what you're going to need, and if you're non-exempt, so you don't meet those 3 bullets we had showed earlier, what you're going to need. So most of you will just need what's on the left side here. You're going to need the environmental review form, Appendix C1. That's on our website. That's the 6 questions, 1-pager. The resolution to accept determination. Again, it's the template's all made out for you. It's the ECO signing off that, yes, this project is exempt. And then documentation of the public meeting. Now, if you don't fall within those 3 bullets we had showed earlier, again, you need that environmental review form, the resolution to accept determination, documentation of the public meetings. The additional documentation that you would need would be that environmental assessment checklist, which is Appendix C2, and then supporting environmental documentation to support what you're putting into that environmental assessment checklist. And I'm going to do some walking through. We have a flow chart here of the different ways the environmental can go. So step 1, designate that environmental certifying officer. 2, making sure you have your full scope of work. 3, determining if you meet the exempt excluded under ARM 8.2.304. 5, so that's that 3 bullets again. If you meet the requirements under that, then yes, your project is exempt. You can move forward with your public meeting. Did you have any comments that means you need further review of your project? No. You make your final determination, complete the environmental review form, signs off on that, and you submit everything to us. The question being, do public comments or controversy necessitate further review of the project? If someone is commenting on your project, and you know, we all know this happens, we all work out in communities where they just don't want the project to maybe go forward, for some reason they don't like that particular building, or they think it should be torn down and turned into a parking lot, which would be horrible. That does not meet the threshold for further review of the project. If it's one person who's just kind of upset about the project, that's not an environmental concern. If someone is concerned environmentally about what's happening with the project and they think it's going to damage a stream, or it's going to increase pollution or something related to the environment, that's when it necessitates maybe going back and looking at it further with an EA. So just be aware that even if you receive negative public comment, that doesn't necessarily change your finding level. And also, again, we're here as a resource, so happy to chat with anyone if they come across something like that. Let's go through it now if you are not exempt. So again, designate your ECO, determine your scope of work. You're not exempt. You automatically know you're not. You would do the full environmental assessment, which is the environmental checklist Appendix B2. Once you've completed that, then you hold your public meeting. It's the same thing. Does anyone have any comments, of concern about your project that's environmentally related? If not, you'd make your final environmental determination, complete your Appendix B1, ECO signs off on it, and you would submit everything to us. If on an EA, there was public comment or controversy that required further review, you would go and hold another public meeting to respond to comments. So it really gives you time to do more investigation, potentially get more support from different sources or different environmental agencies, and then go back to the public process. I've never seen that happen either. I've been here since the beginning of the program. So for the last 5 years, this will be my third cycle. We've never had public comments or controversy that has kind of kept a project in this loop, or even had them move from a finding of exempt excluded into environmental assessment. And I think that was all about environmental. But yes, please reach out to me with any environmental questions. If you want to double check what forms you should be filling out, happy to walk through that at any time.
All right, thank you, Mackenzie. Yes, so as noted, the environmental review process can be a bit confusing, but we really tried to put everything out there for you, and we're here to help you through it. So once your application is submitted, what happens next? So once submitted, Commerce staff will review the applications based on 8 statutory criteria, and they are listed here. So we have immediate economic impact, purpose and need, shovel-ready, historic importance, organization's capacity, ongoing economic impact, local contributions, and public benefit. On each of the next slides, we'll list the points assigned to each criteria, and each one is weighted. Then on each, you can score either a 0, a 1, a 2, or a 3. So 0 being the lowest, 3 being the highest. So level 3 means that the applicant provides an exemplary or very complete application while considering all questions and addresses all the issues deemed important within that criteria. Level 2 means that the applicant provides an adequate application. However, the applicant may not consider some questions or address all issues deemed potentially important. Level 1 means that the applicant provides an inadequate application and may not have considered some questions or address all issues deemed important within that criteria. And then level 0 means the applicant provides an incomplete application and did not consider all questions and/or address all the issues deemed important. So these are all in the guidelines. It's all covered there, but we're going to go through them one by one, and we'll pause after each one to accept any questions that you might have.
Okay, I'm gonna take this one. So this is the first criteria A, which is the immediate economic impact. It is worth 100 possible points. And just a note, these criteria come directly out of the legislature. So this is in statute. and these is what we are required to review the applications, or the lens we are required to review applications through. So on this one, this is the degree to which a project supports economic stimulus or economic activity, including job creation and work creation for Montana contractors and service workers. So we've put the questions out here. What has historically scored low in this category is if the questions aren't addressed at all. So if they're not being answered, if there's kind of general wording. So, so for example, for question 1, part B, what types of jobs? What we are asking there is if you can kind of estimate, are you creating painters, roofers, general laborers, detailing that out. Lower scores in this criteria, the answer to that has been something along the lines of like, this will create local jobs. That just doesn't provide enough detail for us to kind of accurately rank this criteria. Similarly for spillover benefits, this one can be a little tricky, but if it's kind of general wording where it says, this will benefit the local economy, that tends not to score as high as if you can maybe give some concrete examples. And it seems a little bit silly sometimes, but you could say, list out some local hotels that you think might benefit from having additional jobs. One other question we get a lot with this criteria is, okay, we have a small project. This is a $5,000 ask. We're just doing an ADA compliant door for our museum. How are we going to show and compete against, like a multi-million-dollar project? Well, we're looking at this potentially is in a small community. What does that small museum bring to the community, which is usually huge, right? We all know how important some of these facilities are for rural communities. And so you can still demonstrate an economic impact even on that $5,000 smaller ask, which we have awarded in the past. So don't think just because you potentially have a smaller ask or a smaller project that you won't score well in this category. And so, yeah, I think we can go to purpose and need.
Thank you. Yes, so purpose and need. So this one is worth up to 200 in possible points, and it addresses the degree to which the project activity can demonstrate the purpose and needs. So this includes the relevancy of whether the project activity provides features that establish or enhance climate control or fire protection, or address infrastructure, maintenance, or building code issues. So I would say typically this one's relatively straightforward. Often the applicants know or have already assessed what sort of work their site or museum needs. But again, as with the previous one, it's just really important to be as detailed as possible. So describe the current use, instead of saying something like, it's a frequent spot of visitation, or it attracts many visitors. If you can give us numbers, right? How many visitors a year? How many people pay admission a year? That sort of thing. When you describe the condition, be very specific, right? Are we talking about the condition of the building as a whole or the structure as a whole? Or are we talking about the condition of certain aspects of it? If it's a museum and it's impacting the collection, you can address that. Then you'll need to describe the deficiency of the proposed project, or the deficiency that the proposed project will address, and how this has impacted the historic resource, including the duration of time the deficiency has existed. So again, being as detailed as possible increases your chance of scoring higher. So if you can talk about how this deficiency impacts, again, visitation, or impacts your ability to keep the historic resources or museum collections safe, that is all helpful information. And then you'll describe how the proposed project will address the identified deficiency. Again, sometimes this is relatively straightforward. Sometimes you need to provide a little bit more of a narrative connecting the dots as to why this project is necessary for the project or for the historic site itself. And why MHPG funding in particular is necessary for the completion of this. Then you describe the financial need. So why do you need these grant funds? And then describe how the proposed project was selected and prioritized in relation to plans to preserve and maintain the historic resource. So this fifth one, I would say, is particularly important, especially if your application has multiple components in it. So for example, if there's a great deal of need with a historic site, you need to explain why you've proposed a certain activity for this application, right? Why is this the prioritized project? And how does that compare to other plans that you have for this site?
Can I add something to this one, Jordan, quickly?
Yes, please.
On this particular one, we don't require photos, but especially if you're trying to demonstrate need and you have a roof with holes in it, or you have a foundation that's crumbling, or you have a wall with water spots, having those pictures and submitting that with your application really helps support your narrative in this criteria in particular. So I'm going through the review committees and the process with the legislature. I just think having photos in this particular criteria really helps support your score.
Yes. All right. With that, I think we'll move to the next one because I'm not seeing any questions here.
All right, so the next one is shovel ready. It's 100 points possible. So basically this is letting us know where your project is to date at time of application. Have you reached out to potential contractors? Where's the level of this project being ready to go once awarded by the legislature? So the questions we will look to have you answer are: describe the organization's capacity and ability to complete the proposed project within the proposed timeline. With that, as part of your application, you will give us a timeline projection. You'll do that as part of the application. And then if awarded, we will also ask you to update that. So this doesn't have to be a concrete timeline at the time of the application, but the closest you can give us for information, the better. Number 2, describe the status and availability of all matching funds needed to complete the proposed project. Again, you don't have to have your matching funds secured at the time of the application. However, if you do have secured funds already, I would stress that in your application and make sure that we, or those of us who are reviewing the applications, know that, and that you've already got that piece potentially completed if awarded. Number 3, describe how receipt of MHPG funding will enable the ability to leverage additional funding such as grants, loans, and historic tax credits. This can be part of your matching fund. So again, if you've got grants that have already awarded, if you plan to go for grants, if you have loans, please indicate that in this question. And then question 4, describe any potential timeline considerations that are related to permits, environmental considerations, or related to activities to complete the proposed project.
Yes, and I'll just add to number 3 real quick. As we know, funding often begets funding, right? So if you can stress in there that receiving this MHPG grant or this MHPG funding will help you get other sources or secure other sources of funding, that's important information for your application. And essentially this whole category or this whole criteria is just about, we'd like to be able to see this project or see an applicant hit the ground running if they're awarded. So just the degree to which you can show that you are completely prepared to move forward with this project, you've done sort of all the legwork already, now you need the funding and then you're ready to go. That's really helpful.
Thanks, Jordan. Historic importance. So this criteria is worth 300 points. That's the most points of any of the criteria. And that's the degree to which the project contributes to historic or heritage value related to the state of Montana. Question 1, we have described the historical context and significance of the historic resource associated with the proposed project. And then we have that broken down into different categories. So what is the heritage value related overall to the state of Montana? And then we kind of bring it down a bit more to the value of the resource to the local community. And then if there's any relevant designations or listings. So for this particular one, narrative related, again, to that larger state of Montana question and the local community. But if you are a listed building or if you're a contributing building within a national, state, or local district, please note that and put that into this question, and then also provide the supporting documentation for that. So you would provide the listing documentation. You don't have to provide, if you're in a district, don't feel like you have to provide every page related to that district designation. The one page relating to your contributing property is enough. If you're not listed, again, this is where you could get a letter from the local historical society. You could get a letter from, city or county historic preservation folks. I've seen letters of support from nonprofits, historic preservation nonprofits in the state that has helped folks in this criteria. That's all good stuff to list. For 2, describe how the proposed project will sustain the character, defining features, and integrity of the historic resource. This is just making sure that you're, again, going back to those secretary standards and following the best practices for historic preservation. What we wouldn't want to see is something that's going to detract from the historic significance of your building. That would be problematic for this particular grant program. For 3, describing how the proposed project would help promote and interpret the heritage value of the historic resource for the public. For museums, this always tends to be a little easier to answer, right? Like that is what they're doing, is they're promoting and interpreting heritage value for the state. For other applicants, we've seen things where they might have a interpretive wall detailing the history of their building that they're going to put into their public space. They talk about events that they might host in that building to make that right now no one's allowed access to the building, but with this project, people are going to be interacting with that historic space now. So that's been an answer to this that would be acceptable and be helpful to this criteria. And then number 4, describe how the proposed project will adhere to the appropriate Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. So this really ties in with number 2, but we are specifically asking you to address that here. So what we've had in the past is the answer, we will adhere to the Secretary standards. And that is good, and we can accept that, but what really helps the score is when you have a sentence or two saying, this, we've looked at the different standards, this component of the project is being affected by X, and we're going to make sure that all of our windows are, completed in a historic manner and not replacing them with vinyl that's going to detract from the character of the building. So a little bit more detail with number 4, just 3 sentences would really help the score in this criteria. One thing to note, depending on your facility or your museum, everyone's going to vary in this particular one. And so you may have a high heritage value related to the state, and another folks might be more of a local historic significance, and that's okay. We've built this in so that there's plenty of avenues for you to fill out your narrative and demonstrate your historic importance, and not be deemed just because, say, have more local significance rather than state.
Thank you. And yeah, related to number 4 as well, this is where the glossary will come in helpful or be helpful to you once again, because if you would like to be, or as Mackenzie said, it will help you to be specific when answering this particular question. So if you can refer or make use of the terminology that's provided there, that can help you get towards a more detailed answer that answers the questions in a less general way. All right, so with that, we're moving to E, which is the organization's capacity. And I would say this is somewhat connects or ties into criteria C, which is the shovel-ready aspect, but it is different to the extent that this is the degree to which the applicant demonstrates a successful track record or the experience of the organization directing the project or similarly related projects. So this can take a number of different forms. As Mackenzie noted on the last slide, each project is different. So for example, if you're talking about a historic site, very often this is not the first preservation project that is taking place. So if you can talk about previous projects that you have undertaken successfully, this is a great component to bring into this criteria. If you are, say, a city or county and you've undertaken similar projects across the city, that would be a good thing to mention, or other preservation projects that a particular group has administered. That's the sort of thing that you will want to address here. But again, each project is different and the ways that you answer this question will be different. But the goal is to describe the organizational capacity and experience with similar projects of all project partners. So this could be consultants if you're working with them, if you're working with a grant administrator, if you are already working with engineering firm or have some architectural plans in place. What's the capacity? Are you ready to take on this project? You'll need to identify the entity that will administer the grant. That is not always the same thing as the applicant. So that's important to specify. And often the entity who's administering the grant might bring in a different level of expertise or a different type of expertise that will add to the overall capacity of the applicant. So that's important to point out as well. You'll describe if you've had any recent projects, what kind of barriers you had, and how you overcame them, any project delays, any changes to the budget. Essentially, we just need to know that you can, or that we're just looking to see if you can roll with the punches, so to speak, that comes with doing one of these projects. How have you dealt with barriers in the past? How then will you deal with them going forward? And then it says, if available, please provide a copy of your organization's most recent audit or financial documents. This is helpful and can increase the score here as well. Again, since this cycle is the third one, there's a likelihood that some applicants will be returning applicants or will be people who have applicants who have previously completed projects under this program. If so, that's a really important thing to point out as well, that you've already received one of these grants, you've executed it successfully, the project was a success, and you are now coming back for another grant, either for a related project or an entirely different project. So these are all helpful things to point out here.
All right, criteria F. This is the ongoing economic impact. This is 225 points possible. So this is the degree to which the project has ongoing economic benefit to the state as a result of project completion. Again, this could be statewide, this could be locally. This is where you get a chance to tell us what this impact is for you economically. So jobs, tourism, all those sorts of things. So the questions specifically are: describe the ongoing economic impact, for example, on the local economy or tourism of the proposed project to the local region and Montana as a result of project completion. Question 2, describe how your project relates to community goals and previous or concurrent planning efforts. Do you have a downtown revitalization plan, a growth policy, historic preservation plan, economic development strategy, master plan? Tell us about those if those exist in your communities. And number 3, please describe your long-term vision for historic resource and explain how this project fits into organizational plans. Plans could be strategic plans, interpretive, business, outreach. Those are just some of the examples. And then will this project decrease your operating costs? And if it does, how will those savings be reinvested?
Yep, and I will just make one note on this one. We're not requiring that you have full strategic, plans, interpretive plans, business plans, etc. But every entity has some sort of goals, vision, mission for your organization. And so just making sure that in your narrative, you're addressing that on question 3. Oh, okay, perfect. This is mine. So this is a new one that came out of the last session. If you have completed a MHPG grant previously, this one did not exist. So this one is new. And it is local contributions, and this is up to 100 possible points. So it's the degree to which the project shows local contribution, for example, monies and letters of support. The question has 3 components. So we would like you to describe your community's commitment to the project by showing various levels of local contribution. So A, what degree of local cash has been committed? So you'd want to talk about what your funding sources and your match is coming from. Or say you have someone in the community who has said, we'll be willing to donate materials or work. If this is awarded, you would want to talk about that here. If this is a phased project, please describe funds expended through previous phases. So again, if you have a facility and you have invested $100,000 in the last year, you would want to talk about that here, even if that's not a part of the proposed project this time. So if you've just replaced the roof and it cost you that money, put that in this section and talk about that, even if you're coming into us for, say, plumbing because you've had a pipe burst or something like that. For C, what local organizations support the project? So this would be providing letters of support. No letters of support would be a bit of a red flag. Having some letters of support from different types of entities is always great. So maybe you have some governmental organizations that are supporting you or other businesses or local nonprofits. That would be important to get those in this criteria.
Thank you. All right, so this brings us to the final statutory criteria, which is H. This is public benefit, up to 100 in possible points. And as I noted in the beginning, this is something that has really been stressed by the legislature. So we're going to linger on this one for a minute. And this is the degree to which the applicant demonstrates anticipated public benefit, including the extent the site or building will be open to the public and the degree of immediate facility use after project completion. So describe the project's anticipated public benefit. So in this one, you'll need to detail exactly when the facility will be open to the public after project completion. So is the facility not currently open, but will be open after, say, the roof is fixed, or is this a longer term project? What is the public benefit of the project? And note that this is slightly different than the economic benefit. Right. This is, if it's a local historical society, it's providing these historic resources to the community, both the local community and the broader community, if it's attracting tourists, if it's a mixed use building, so let's say partially residential, but partially open to the community in some other capacity, either through retail, or let's say that there's public meeting spaces or community rooms, that kind of thing. C, what proportion of the building will be open to the public? This is important to address as well, particularly if the building or structure is mixed use and or privately owned. So the legislature is interested in focusing on projects that have this degree of public benefit. So if it's a privately owned building, this is where I would encourage you to really think through a narrative answer to this question that addresses the public value of this project and of this building as a whole, and includes the degree that it's accessible. And then the final thing here is what efforts will be made to make the building accessible to the public. So often some of these projects don't seem to be necessarily an immediate fit under historic preservation. Let's say it's about improving ADA accessibility or fixing an elevator, that sort of thing. That absolutely is something you'll want to address under this criteria. If a lack of these things is preventing the public from benefiting from this building, that makes it an important project. And so this would be a good place to address any accessibility issues that are being addressed here, or efforts that are being made through this project to make the building work better for the public. Mackenzie or Mickey, do you have anything to add to this one?
Yeah, just to reiterate, if you have your proposed project is for collections or collection storage or something that's maybe not visible to the public, but you're a museum facility or you're a public facility, you're still meeting the intent and the criteria of this. Even though your project is on the back end, you're still able to answer this question because your building is 100% open, you know, to the public minus storage, so maybe like 10%, something like that. Your building is accessible to the public. Maybe there's, even in the storage facilities, maybe you allow researchers and students to come and access those spaces. That still counts. And so even if your project is not public necessarily, if your facility is public and the benefits public overall, then you're still meeting the intent of this criteria.
Yes, exactly. And especially with museums, preserving collections, protecting collections, all of that has a public benefit. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and move along to the selection process. All right, so it's important to note that Commerce staff has no decision-making authority over any application and only provides advisory recommendations to the legislature. So as we noted here with these statutory criteria, we go through and we'll assign or assess the applications according to these criteria and assign the possible points in order to make these advisory recommendations. But it is the legislature that has the decision-making authority. So Commerce presents recommendations to the legislature during the regular legislative session. The legislature will make the funding decisions, and then Commerce will communicate with applicants about this process. And we strongly encourage you to testify regarding your projects. Again, Commerce will review the applications based on the 8 statutory criteria, and the applicant may not submit any additional information after the application deadline, unless requested by Commerce staff to clarify information already presented in the application. Awards that are made during the next legislative session and awarded applicants may begin to incur costs after the bill that includes the project has become law. So with this last session, that was in May of 2023. So once that bill was signed, any awarded applicants were able to start incurring costs. Awarded applicants do need to complete startup conditions, which include the execution of a contract with Commerce, and then, but may begin project activities prior to that. As we approach the legislative session, we will provide information about how to most, sorry, I don't know what happened here. Oh, as we approach the legislative session, we'll provide information as soon as we have it about when the hearing will take place and when you will have the opportunity to testify. When you are developing the scope and timeline of your project in your grant application, you should consider that the award timeline will involve approximately 15 months between when applications are due and when the award decisions are made. So this might influence project priorities and timing for any leveraged funds. In advance of the legislative session, we'll also provide some tips for effectively testifying. And finally, once these rankings and recommendations are determined, we'll host technical assistance calls with applicants to review the criteria and the points scored. So you'll have the opportunity to go over your application and to find out how you scored. All right, so here are the instructions or just the details about how to apply. Again, they're due February 29th, 2024. So this is a leap year, so it will be the last day in February. And you must include the following. So Appendix A, which is this application eligibility checklist. Appendix B, which is the application itself, including all the responses to the statutory criteria or statutory review criteria that we just went over. Appendix C, which is the completed environmental review, and then a sample project budget and a sample implementation schedule. And then, of course, any associated documents. So this would include the strategic plans if you have them, letters of support, photos, anything like that. So one electronic copy of the application and any relevant information and associated documents must be submitted to Commerce. We have those instructions in our guidelines, but they are also here as well. You'll go to transfer.mt.gov, and you'll need to create an account in the file transfer service if you do not have one. If you want it, or if you would like additional instructions for submitting electronically, please do reach out to me. I think Mickey is dropping those instructions in the chat as well. And associated documents, again, may include these photos that convey the deficiencies and work proposed in the application, the letters of support, the planning documents, or paperwork that clarifies that the property is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Once again, these are not required, but they provide important information and context for your project. They help the review team and they can improve your score, particularly if they help you answer some of these questions in the statutory criteria. All right, so this just goes over the project timeline, particularly if you're awarded. Obviously, you're focused more on the application right now, but again, for planning purposes, it is helpful to see how this would proceed. So again, award, if awarded, the effective date would likely be May 2025. And you can begin incurring costs for reimbursement, again, right after that bill is signed. After that, you'll need to complete the startup conditions. This is the list of what we require for startup. So it's pretty extensive. So the more that you can have ready to go, the quicker this process goes. So you'll need a W-9 and an EFT, the budget, the implementation schedule. Again, you'll have already completed templates or drafts of those. You'll just need to adjust them based on the shifting timeline, or if anything has changed, or if you've reprioritized certain aspects of your project. Match documentation. So again, we don't require that you secure the match, during the application process, but once awarded, we do require match documentation. Then you'll need to provide proof of insurance, so workers' compensation and liability, and property insurance, a completed management plan. We do provide a template for that, signatory form, completed signer information, and then, if applicable, a grant assistance agreement. So after we receive and have reviewed all of that, we execute a contract with Commerce. Once this is in place, grantees can begin submitting requests for reimbursement. Within this, there's the procurement process. So all governmental awardees must follow state procurement. Commerce recommends that private or nonprofit entities follow procurement. However, it is not required. Then you can begin construction. So this is where you undertake the project activities, you receive invoices, state prevailing wage rates may apply to your project. Then you can request funds. So you'll submit requests for reimbursement, which requires a few different forms: the request for funds form, a progress report form, a uniform invoice tracking spreadsheet, and then any applicable invoices. And we will again go over all of this with a startup workshop for those that are awarded. But I do think it's helpful to know the process in advance. And then finally, once you've completed the project, you'll complete a project closeout. So this includes a certificate of substantial completion, submitting any final requests for funds, submitting a project completion report. Then we'll send you a notice. And then finally, grantees must retain project records for 5 years from the, for 5 years from the closeout date. So again, we have some great resources on our website here. As noted, the applicants who are awarded funds must complete startup conditions, which includes the execution of a contract, and will be required to follow applicable state regulations and processes. For the purposes of this webinar, we don't really go into this, but if you're interested, we do have the information in our MHPG administration manual on the Commerce website. Additionally, Commerce will be providing a webinar at a future date for awarded projects. Grantees should be prepared to provide information to the department about how they intend to procure grant administration, professional services, and construction services in accordance with the applicable procurement laws. Again, this is something we require of all governmental grantees, and recommend that private or nonprofit ones follow. So to help provide financial support for compliance with state procurement laws when applicable and manage a project, applicants whose projects are over $50,000 are eligible to include 10% of their funds requested towards the administration of the project. So this means that a smaller museum or an organization could obtain funds that address facility needs, but also can obtain the administrative support to manage the grant funds. All right, so if you'd like to find out more, again, we encourage you to visit the Historic Preservation Grant Program website. You are also free to contact anyone on our team. For general questions regarding historic preservation, and particularly for any questions regarding historic tax credits, please contact the State Historic Preservation Office. SHPO, that's SHPO, SHPO and also those of us here at Commerce are both here as resources to help projects succeed to unlock the potential of Montana's treasured historic resources. All right, and with that, we have a few frequently asked questions here. So we've been responding to a large degree of inquiries from prospective applicants from across the state. And so we're just going to go over some of the most common questions that we receive. So the first is, can MHPG funds be used for operations? The answer is no, operational expenses are not eligible for funding. Can an applicant apply for more than one grant? Yes. Multiple applications can be submitted by one applicant for different projects. However, multiple applicants cannot apply for the same project. I would say this is mostly applicable to local governments. They may apply for multiple projects if they have multiple historic sites, for example, but they can't apply for multiple grants for a single building. All right, again, we've received a number of inquiries about residential properties and are they eligible? The answer is potentially. So projects are ineligible if they confer only a private benefit and are not open to the public. Okay, so this includes, I would say most, if not all, most single family private residences. However, mixed-use properties, including those with housing, are eligible provided they demonstrate public benefit and are accessible to the public to some degree. When will funds be available? Again, they're made available during the 2020, or awards are made during the 2025 legislative session. Once the legislature passes into the bill, which will be probably May of 2025, it's then submitted to the governor for signature to become effective, and that becomes the official award date. After that date, grantees may incur project costs. However, you cannot request any funds until after you are contracted with Commerce. And then any funds that you incur before this date, even if they cannot be reimbursed, can count towards the match. And for that, you can refer back to the eligible match slide. If you're unfamiliar with the legislative process, you can sign up for notifications regarding House Bill 12 here, and Mickey will drop that link in, but that can be helpful just so you're getting updates. Are the funds required up front? No, we do not require funds up front. Project funds are dispersed by submitting a request for funds and applicable invoices to Commerce. Typically, invoices require payment within 30 days, which allows you time to submit a request for funds from Commerce before the invoice is due. Typically, this takes 7 to 10 business days to process, but we do try to expedite these as soon as possible. With this timeline, the funds are in the grantee's bank account with time to pay the contractor. And we are in regular communication with each grantee throughout the startup, request for funds, and closeout process. And again, some of the requirements for requesting funds will be covered during the startup webinar so that you have all the information you need to get that process quickly. Do I need a strategic plan, operational plan, or fully audited financials? No, again, we don't require these to be eligible or competitive for MHPG funding. However, as part of the process, providing such materials when available can help set the context and give us more information about the project and the organization's capacity to complete the project. So you should feel comfortable submitting any plans created as additional materials. If the plans are not available, then you can articulate your goals, your mission, your vision in response to the application questions. Can I submit supplemental materials? We've covered this, but yes, again, supplemental materials can definitely be included. However, they are not required. As a reminder, inclusion of these supporting documents may improve scoring within criteria. They're helpful because they give us a better sense of the project, provide more detail, and the visuals are always helpful. I would stress that quality over quantity is encouraged here. So if you can submit a few key letters of support that show a range of sources of local support rather than an exhaustive list, that is helpful. What does the legislative process involve? Again, Commerce has no decision-making authority over any application, but we provide advisory recommendations to the legislature. During the legislative session, the legislature will review Commerce's advisory recommendations and consider each application. During this process, applicants will have the opportunity to testify on behalf of their project. We do strongly encourage you to testify and share an overview of the project, its importance, its impact, and any applicable updates. So sometimes things have changed slightly since the application. Like maybe you've secured one of the matches that wasn't guaranteed at the time of application. That's the sort of detail that would be important to include when you testify. Commerce communicates the date, time, and details of this process as soon as practicable. This may be short notice. It has been in the past. But again, we give you the information as soon as we ourselves have it. All right. Again, we encourage you to reach out to SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, with questions particularly about getting on the historic registry. We have their information here. And then finally, any questions? So I am the MHPG program specialist. So I'm a good first contact, but you are very welcome to reach out to anyone on the CEV Community and Economic Vitality team. So that includes myself, Mackenzie Espeland, or Mickey Zerker. All three of us are on the call today. And if you have any questions about commerce or related to other programs, we encourage you to reach out to DOC-CDD. And I think with that, we are opening it up to questions.
All right, so we have just over a dozen or so questions. Some of them I think were potentially addressed during the presentation, but I'm just going to go through them all again, just in case somebody missed the information. So the first question, and then Mackenzie and Jordan, please feel free to add. Can a project be phased and qualify for this grant? I guess the simple answer would be yes, but keep in mind the statutory criteria. Number C was shovel ready. And then I was looking at the other one, open to the public, right? Which one is that? Public benefit, to the degree which the applicant is open immediately after the project is completed. So that was statutory criteria H. So I guess if you have a good explanation to both of those criteria, the project could be phased, but just keep in mind that those are true criteria. Mackenzie, Jordan, would you like to add?
No, I think that covered it, Mickey. The big one, like you said, being that public benefit, especially the legislature in this last session really wanted the projects to be going and moving once the grant was completed. So depending on how your phased approach is structured, are you phasing it to where once you've completed that phase, it is open to the public, but yes, you're going to do additions later on, or you're going to do other updates later on, then I think you're easily able to meet that. If you're doing a phase where the building is still 2 phases from being open to the public, it would struggle in that particular criteria for this one for H.
All right, the second question, this was on the eligibility continued slide. Jordan, I don't know if you can go to that or not, but projects should demonstrate economic impact immediately after completion. And then how can this be best demonstrated for local government public buildings open to the public? Mackenzie or Jordan, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, so I think you just say that, and the building is continuing and remaining open to the public, and that's how it's conferring the benefit, and that would meet the intent of the criteria. The wording is a little stranger from the legislature, but they just basically want to make sure that it's open and available to the public right after the project's completion. So economic impact, we're not talking in this sense about retail or commercial space, but you can definitely talk about the public benefit related to public access more so than the economic impact. And we would accept that.
Yeah. Also, you can make, you know, we all understand that a strong local community has spillover economic impacts. Right. So if there are, say, civic buildings that need some work and that is being pursued through this grant, you know, strengthening the local community, whether that's providing access to civic buildings or making sure that the courthouse isn't falling down, you know, the economic impact is spread out throughout the community by providing a stronger civic foundation there. And so you can just stress that in your application.
All right. Next question. Is there a specific procedure to designate an authorized representative for the ECO?
Yeah, so I'll hop in this one. Not on our end. Depending on the type of applicant you are, you might have a process on your end. I know for certain cities and counties, they have to go through, you know, a city council meeting, and it has to be a resolution at the local level. Nonprofits may have a similar process with a board, but we will not be checking that process. We are just, you'll have that filled out of who your resolution sign saying it's the ECO, but how you pass that resolution is determined by the applicant.
Okay, if you begin construction on a project after February 28th, 2023, are you eligible for approved costs to be reimbursed if the grant is awarded, or are construction costs after February 28th, 2023 considered matched funds until award date? I will start by answering, and then ladies, please chime in. So costs can only be incurred after the governor signs the bill. So if you've started your project right after application, you could use that potentially for the match funds, but you couldn't use it for reimbursement funds from the grant that you are awarded. And I'll let you guys add to that.
That was perfect, Mickey. I would just say we have to check the invoice dates once we do get to the point of request for reimbursement and make sure the invoices are dated post the award letter date. So no, we wouldn't be able to reimburse those costs, but yes, they could potentially be considered match. So right on, Mickey. Yep.
Yes, and just make sure that if you're going to pursue that, that you make sure that any money that you are spending that you want to use towards the match is related to the project. And we are happy to answer questions about, you know, whether something would count towards the match or not. So if you have any questions about that, it's probably a good idea just to run it by us before you bank on that. And also it's just good to remember too that you're not guaranteed the grant. So even if you've been received some high scoring and have ranked very highly, only proceed with the project if you do, you know, if you do have the funds available to do it. And I don't want to see anyone get into a bind if they are not able or are not awarded. So just make sure that if you're counting those funds towards the match, that you have thought out also what would happen if you do not receive the grant.
All right. Next question. Is the replacement of the mechanical and electrical system exempt from MHPA?
Yeah, so that to me does meet the 3 bullet points. That is a functional component replacement of an existing facility. So it would be exempt excluded. So you still do the process, but for that particular scope, it should not rise to the level of an environmental assessment.
Okay, next question. Can an applicant submit a grant application for more than one property? I do believe we addressed this with the FAQs. The answer is yes. Next.
Yes.
Okay. Anything more to add?
Nope.
We're good. Okay. Next question, can a nonprofit hire a project coordinator as a contractor that can be included as a project cost? I will let one of the other ladies answer that one.
So yes, how we term that is a grant administrator, but same thing it sounds like. And so yes, you could procure them to manage the grant. That we have a limit on that within the funding. So when you apply, you would want to kind of estimate how much of grant administration would cost you for the potential project, include that in your budget, and it can only be up to 10% of whatever you're asking for. So if you're asking for a $50,000 grant, you would only be able to budget $5,000 potentially for a grant administrator in the project.
Okay, if the project was by riparian areas but not in the riparian area, is that considered something needed in the environmental review?
Yeah, so it depends on the project. You know, if it's an existing building and it's internal work only, then that shouldn't affect the environmental review, or, you know, the building's existing and operating as is. Some exceptions to that could potentially be if the building is currently not in use and you're going to bring it into use and that is potentially going to affect the area, then that might rise to the level of an environmental assessment. If it's new construction, absolutely, you would want to be considering that in an environmental assessment. Happy to chat more about what the scope of the project is and what you could look at to consider that particular area. If you are interested in taking a peek at that full environmental assessment, it has categories that need to be considered under MHPA environmental review, and it breaks it out. So it's going to talk about animal species, it's going to talk about wetlands, it's going to talk about floodplains, and you have to assess your project within each of those categories if it rises to an environmental assessment. So that might be something that potentially feel free to reach out to me on separately, because the answer is possibly yes or no.
Okay, this is a couple different questions, so I'll try to answer each question before I ask the next one. Does the Department of Commerce have a sense of the number and/or amount of grants to be funded in the current grant cycle? The answer as of today of this recording is no, because we don't yet know what our funding line is. Anybody else want to add to that or make that more clear?
Yeah, we don't get a projected funding amount from the bed tax. It varies actually, but we probably won't get one until the summer. What I would say to this is it seems to be rising, you know, but it's all about beds and heads and how many people are staying in hotels and how that calculation comes out. But if you look at the first session, our projected funding line that year was around 2 million, and the legislature chose to award 5.4. And then if we go to the next slide of 2023, our projected funding line this cycle, we were told, was around 8.5 million, and they actually awarded 11.4. So the last two sessions, they have historically funded even beyond the funding line. They can also choose to fund less projects than our projected funding line. The committee has that ability as well. So unfortunately, there's not a good answer for that at this time. You could guesstimate that it would potentially be around that, I would say somewhere between $5 to $8 million mark again. But again, they can choose to fund less than that or more projects than that. Did we not address, I'm trying to think, oh, I'm sorry, Mickey, I'll let you go if we didn't address part of that too.
Nope. So the next part of the question is, in reviewing applications, are there page or character limits on responses? The short answer is no, I believe.
No, we thought about putting some limits in there, but ultimately decided against it this round. So you can type to your heart's desire.
Okay, and then if a project looked to restore a previously removed architectural feature of the structure, is this eligible?
So technically, yes. However, it might be harder to demonstrate purpose and need. It would be harder to demonstrate economic impact on a project like that in comparison to projects that are addressing the integrity of the building or accessibility of the building. So not ineligible, but just have to think of it within the criteria as set by the legislature.
All right, what if the pre-construction legwork is happening during the award cycle? I think we've addressed this question potentially. I think what you're asking is, can those awards be, or can that pre-construction work be paid out? Which I think was similar to our like question number 2. So as far as matching funds, yes. As far as funds that were awarded from MHPG, has to be after the governor signs the bill.
Yes, and if you're asking if you can do the pre-construction work before you apply, the answer is yes. This can also contribute to the shovel readiness of the project. But do remember that if you're, particularly if you're a governmental applicant, you will need to demonstrate that you followed procurement.
When will the recording be available?
Very soon.
Soon?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That is a good question. I will check, but I imagine we will have it up either the end of this week or early next week.
Would the implementation schedule start date for grant award be July 2025?
Oh, and I think they said that
Oh.
was answered.
Are we good, Mackenzie?
Yeah, looks like.
So I will start this and then ladies fill in, please. You can do the implementation. So there is a draft implementation schedule that is on the website that kind of has the key benchmarks or landmarks that you can put in your estimated dates. So it could potentially vary from project to project.
Yes. And yeah, there can be elements on the implementation schedule that predate the award itself. So kind of related to the previous question, if you've engaged in some of that pre-construction work prior to the award date, that would still go on the implementation schedule.
All right, next question. Is there such a thing as too many associated documents? Our project has a significant backstory, history, pictures, master plans, and other documentation. I think Jordan potentially answered this question in the FAQs. Do you want to just repeat that real quickly, Jordan?
Sure. I mean, yes, technically there is no limit. That said, I would focus on making sure that each individual or each additional document or resource that you include in your application is not redundant. So is adding something different to the application that we don't have. In some cases, it might be just as productive to refer to something or to acknowledge that you have some sort of, or that you have the planning document, but you may not need to include every single associated document that you have. But yes, there is no limit, but I would definitely recommend focusing on quality rather than quantity, and also just making sure that they're not repetitive. So if the information can be conveyed with one additional supplemental source, that's great. If you need a few to make that same point, that is also acceptable.
Okay, next question. If we have multiple buildings that need new roofs, do we include them all in the grant application or apply for multiple grants?
I would say this depends on your site. So if it is all part of one historic site, as sometimes happens, sometimes there's, one historic site with multiple sort of structures on it. And if they all need a new roof, then you would include that as one project or one application. However, if say you're an entity that manages or is responsible for several different sites, and they all have different structures with roofing needs, then those would be separate applications. Does that sound accurate to you too?
Yep, that makes sense to me.
Okay. Okay, next question. We are a city library. Would you prefer audited city financials or just a summary of department financials, the library only?
Yeah, so our preference would be just a summary of the department library only financials. If we're talking about also the need, like the financial need, if you're from a community who has a low tax base or doesn't have a lot of funds, you could put in the narrative a little bit about that, talking more citywide. But as far as the documentation goes, I would just provide the library financials.
Okay, next question. What are some best practices for MHPG applications? I would say one of the best things you could do is reach out to us at the staff, ask us questions, just talk through your project with us. Anything else to add, ladies?
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to refer to points Mackenzie made during the statutory review or statutory review criteria, which is just to be as specific and detailed as possible. So, try to avoid like yes, no answers and instead really engage with those questions and explain how they pertain to your particular project. That would be one of the most significant things you can do.
And my best practice advice, I think they covered it great. Yes, I can't say that word today, specificity, but also contact us, please, about any questions you have. We'd love to chat with people about all of them. So that was a great point from Mickey. But also after you've applied, testifying. I cannot stress enough the need to be present with the legislature and the committee who makes these decisions. When you're in that room, they definitely note who has testified on behalf of their projects and who hasn't. And it does help inform their decisions to fund more projects because they see the passion for the projects and the need in Montana for them across the state. And so if for some reason you apply and your project is below the projected funding line in the governor's budget, don't be discouraged because they do fund projects beyond that. But testifying is a big part of that. So that's after the application and, kind of in that legislative process, but that's just something that I can't reiterate enough. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we have a number of examples of this happening in the previous sessions where projects that were ranked quite highly were questioned by the legislature, and then projects that were ranked below the funding line did rise up or were awarded funding based on the continued involvement of the applicants. And related to that, staying involved with your local representatives can be helpful. So making sure, especially as you approach the legislative session, that your representatives know that you've applied for this and are, have some awareness of the importance and the impact of this project. That can be helpful as well.
Yep, and the last question as of right now, is there a list of funded projects this last cycle? So I'm just going to drop the link. You just can go to the Montana legislature, look up bill information, and it's House Bill 12. So give me 1 second here. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. If you go there, right at the very top, it says bill type and numbers. So it's a drop down box. You're going to do HB for House Bill, and then you'll write 12. and then you'll just go to find and then if you're at the very, very top, you can hit the little PDF icon. Yep, there you go. That's a better way to do it too. I'll drop that in there. So somebody, I don't know if you guys can all see that, actually dropped the link, but I also wanted to explain to you how to do it, because if you're also interested in the previous year's bill, that's where you could go as well.
Yes, and one note, if you are looking at the bill from 2021, it's not quite as clear as the one from 2023. The 2023 bill includes all of the projects that were awarded and the amounts that they were awarded for. The 2021 bill includes more projects than were ultimately awarded. So the idea was that projects were awarded up until the funding had been reached. So a number of the projects listed in that bill were actually not awarded. So just use some caution when you're reviewing the 2021 bill, because it doesn't fully represent the projects that were ultimately awarded funding.
All right, that's all the questions we had in the Q&A. We can maybe give everybody a few more seconds to see if there's anything else. I also presume that we can put these questions with answers maybe as like a sheet on our website if anybody wants to go back and reference them. I'm guessing we can maybe do that.
Yep, we can add to our we have some FAQs right now currently on our webpage, but we can add the ones from today on there as well. That'd be good.
Okay, it looks like we're good. Thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you, everyone.